Welcome to Stripping the Dipping, a podcast where we explore anything and everything. You're joined by your usual co-host, Denzel Clarkson, aka Young Dens in a Benz, and I'm very fascinated today because we always talk about drivers and the talent required to perform at the top echelon of motorsport, but rarely do we ever acknowledge the brain power, the precision, and the ability, to make decisions under very immense pressure. So, to help us develop our understanding of this even more, I'm very enlightened to introduce our star guest. He's a director and race engineer for his own company, A Cup of Racing. Nice name there. He's a race engineer of the very renowned GTE and GT3 Aston Martin outfit, TF Sport. And also, he happens to be a very prominent esports engineer of Williams Racing as well. So, without further ado, I have the Italian stallion. It is Davide de Russis. Davide, firstly of all, your credentials are credentialing, man. Honestly, like you have so many accolades and so many roles. But how are you doing today, and how have you been recently?
Yeah, all good, all good. I mean, it's been a busy year today, this year. Just in my summer break now will be other 2 weeks only, and then we start to race again. But I mean, it's a great level of racing, not just in the real world, also in sim racing. So pretty happy for everything.
Oh, absolutely. We share your excitement as well, and I agree. There's so much racing out there, so many different series as well, which we're going to touch on. And even for you, just being a prominent member of a team and just in the faculties that you work as well, it's so interesting and inspiring for a lot of our listeners as well. So, I always like to start, Davide, by breaking the ice with the guests. And one of the first things I like to always ask is, what are your earliest motorsport memories growing up in Italy, and like what got you into motorsport?
I mean, it was passion first of all in my family. When I was a kid, my father brought me to karting and then motocross. So I tried to be a driver when I was a kid. Then things worked out differently and start engineering school and did race engineering as a job. That's actually not driving, but I would say almost the same in terms of excitement and making decision faster.
Absolutely, and I think to be fair as well, Davide, like the two things, driving a race car and then also, the race engineering side of it, they go hand in hand because we even see in modern day series as well, such as Formula One, for example, the drivers are very reliant on having the feedback, having the line of communication, having the intelligence and data from the engineers as well when it comes to making those split second decisions that can ultimately, win or cost you a race, which we'll get into on this episode as well. But then talking about that as well, Davide, I wanted to kind of ask you because you're the perfect man for this. How does one become a race engineer? What was the path you took in terms of your education to get there? And could you talk about maybe some of the obstacles or some of the challenges you had to face?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's difficult. I would say the last 11 years has been crazy to finally get in a position where you are the race engineer and you are a race engineer in a high level like WEC or ELMS. Uh, there isn't a fixed path, but I would say you need to commit a lot because it's not something you can learn from books. You never stop to learn. Every day is a school day in this job. And if I need to start speaking about the path, I mean, you need to do engineering. I studied in Italy after my scientific high school, automotive engineering as a bachelor. Then I worked a bit, make a lot, but really a lot of volunteering experience, karting, everything about racing, Formula student, whatever it takes to be involved because is what high level teams requires. Is not just a degree. They want a very good degree, but they want people with some hand-on experience, let's say, in motorsport. And then I moved to the UK in 2018. I studied my master in Oxford Brookes University. I did Formula student that year too. And then after 12 months, got my degree and start to find and search for teams. I actually found a very good team, M Sport, with the Bentley GT3 at the beginning of 2020. It was a very short experience because then COVID came, we all locked down, Bentley closed down the program, and it was a very difficult and challenging time for that. But then I opened up a cup of racing, tried to do some sim racing engineering, where basically I was trying to move the real world motorsport procedure into sim racing using then bugs and learning the software, because at the end of the story is a software, so you need to learn it. And then again find the GT4 teams. Started in Germany, GT4 Germany in 2020. Then I did GT4 Scandinavian last year, with pretty good results, I would say. Fun in new championship, and then this year was again back to the original level I would like to be, you know. So World Endurance Championship, Asian Le Mans Series, and ELMS, European Le Mans Series, GT3 and GTE cars. A lot to learn, I would say, but still a good level, so enjoying it. It's stressful sometimes.
I could definitely imagine that, Davide, and also as well, I think the key point to take away from what you mentioned that there is just, it takes a lot of resilience, dedication as well, hard work. Getting a master's in most kind of subjects is very difficult, but then if you want to get into, engineering and motorsport and like, the Formula Student program as well, I imagine it's a lot of studying and hard work, but of course it pays off in the long term run, as you mentioned as well, because you've gained so much practical experience already by the time that you've been able to work in the other series you mentioned, like the World Endurance Championship and the European Le Mans as well. And even just the resilience, because it's funny you should mention the Bentley thing to us too, because I remember this like as a casual sim racer myself, looking at this year's kind of roster and there being no Bentleys on the actual kind of calendar for the SRO kind of program because they pulled out. And again, that's just me from like the sim racing point of view. But in real life, there are real life mechanics and engineers like yourself, real life drivers. That when a project like that maybe comes to an end, then you have to be resourceful and try to find other opportunities. So I'm really glad that you touched on that. And something I want to delve into a bit further was a cup of racing. Could you tell us more about that and what disciplines of motorsport they are engaged with at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, Cup of Racing was something unexpected, we say, but not 100% unexpected, because my plan original before lockdown was to start my own company, maybe after 5, 10 years experience as an employee. Let's say that the Bentley thing and COVID just accelerate everything. So I decided I had nothing to lose. So I opened up a sole trader business at the time in the UK, and tried to support, as I said, sim racing individual and teams with the same procedure you use in the real world. The key was to make the experience to the sim driver, because at the time was very new. I mean, sim racing wasn't new, but getting support from an engineer was very new. And the key was giving the same level of experience of a racing driver to a guy that is doing a completely different job and just want to have fun with the sim racing. This started to work out very good in very small time, maybe because of lockdown, don't know. And actually, I had a couple of international teams asking for me as an engineer for them in sim racing, and I did a lot until Williams now. So it started by case, I would say, because it was just nothing to lose at the time, and I'm very proud of it, because in just less than 3 years, started from nothing, like an hobby more than anything else. It became a limited company, and have give me a full-time job at this level, doing Williams stuff and with TF Sport too. So I'm very happy with that. And I can't say more than that. I mean, it's what I'm doing at the moment. Is 100% my commitment is making this limited company work through the teams I'm working for, and at the moment it's not going so bad, I would say. So let's see next year.
Oh, well, we're going to keep hopeful for you, Davide. And, it's very exciting. And I think as well, like, it's inspiring for many young people out there because, during the pandemic, there were a lot of people that, were quite upset. They were getting depressed because they thought that, it was the end of the world for them. They didn't know
Yeah,
what opportunities would be there. And, you take an individual like which, you look at kind of gaps in the market, you look at a value that you can add to businesses or teams, and the work that you do with a cup of racing, I can say when I was doing some research like off air, it's very phenomenal and very exciting as well. And we're very, very excited, to kind of see what the future of it will continue to bring as well. And also just seeing as how that has given you a natural progression, even with like the official Williams racing team as well. So it's very phenomenal, and I'm so happy for you. And then,
Thank you very much.
we'll, you're more than welcome. And, we'll come back to that. But another thing I wanted to touch on as well, whilst we have your time, is, we mentioned it earlier in the show that you work with a very successful and prominent race team in the TF Sport team. So for our listeners at home, I think we did that episode with Raffaello Marcello at the beginning of the year, and I kind of gave a breakdown of, GT racing and GT4 racing and so forth. And obviously you get the likes of Mercedes, you get the likes of Audi, you get the likes of BMW, bringing a new M4 to all the endurance races, and also Aston Martin with the Vantage. It's a V8 car with, I think, an engine derived from AMG. It's me being really nerdy, but nonetheless, it's a very successful car. TF Sport have had some very successful drivers in the likes of Nicky Tim, which is a very accredited driver. But bringing it back to Davide, you know, David, like it's so awesome that you've had the opportunity to work with TF Sport and you're still working with them now. And the question I wanted to ask you is, what is it like, preparing and overseeing a race strategy, in a real life kind of scenario where you have like GT car series?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question because actually, at the beginning of the year, I had very, very poor experience in terms of preparing a race strategy because I always did GT4 racing, and GT4 racing are for the 90% of the time are 1 hour sprint race with the maximum strategies, putting the fastest driver in the pit window and try to make something out of that. When I started with them, it was February, directly into Asian Le Mans series as a race engineer with the GT3, and I found myself in the position where to actually decide a strategy with 3 drivers, regulations, and a lot more than GT4, let's say. So at the beginning it was difficult. I need to learn very quickly a lot. Now it's not the most difficult thing I'm doing in a race weekend, I would say. It's something very challenging sometimes because you need to understand the situation of your drivers, the situation of your car, have an idea about the performance you can get, and then decide a lot of numbers, simple numbers, mathematical calculation, where it's worth it to box on a full course yellow, for example, or if a safety car comes in, the regulation in Asian Le Mans or ELMS in this case is 3 laps, so you can't beat, then the 4 lap is exactly as a full course yellow. So you need to sort out a lot of stuff, and it's not difficult in terms of calculation, because calculation, as I said, is simple mathematics. It's just making decision in that half a second you need to make the difference sometimes is based on experience, and at that level I have 6 month experience, I would say. So that's the most difficult stuff, and the stress comes from there because you can make a race with strategy. You can really change a race because it's endurance. So the minimum time for a race is 4 hours, and it's a lot of time. It doesn't matter if you start P8 or P1. You actually can change a lot having a proper strategy. So it's important. It's challenging. It's not difficult. Make the calculation. It's difficult making the right decision in the right moment.
Absolutely, and I would second you on that as well. And it's so interesting just to see the fine margins between getting a calculation obviously correct in terms of the mathematics sense, but in the realistic or in the kind of reality of it, how it plays out, whether you lose the track position, whether
Yeah.
by pitting and then boxing onto fresh tires, that gives the driver currently in the stint the advantage with the tire kind of delta as well, and also just like like I guess you always have to try and prepare for the unexpected, like a safety car. But at the same time, I guess you can't take too much risk either. Or you look at probably the probability of a safety car coming out as well, and that probably influences the strategy quite a lot. But to kind of segue this question, or another thing I wanted to point out, and I wanted to congratulate you guys on as well, is that you guys recently won in the Pro Am class at Le Mans as well. So First of
Yeah,
all, congratulations for that, Davide, because it's
thank
quite
you
an
very much.
amazing achievement. And when I
Yeah.
watch the Le Mans and I see like a car break down on like lap 200 or 300, and like there's a minute left, you can see not only how much it means to the drivers to go through the emotions, to go through the sacrifice, to go through all the hard work, but the mechanics and engineers too that sacrifice their lives to go on the road and stuff like that. So to be successful in such a highly competitive environment like that too, and 24 hours, I think is very remarkable and one thing definitely to be very proud of. But the question really was, Davide, was how do you go about preparing the race strategy for an endurance race of that nature, like a whole 24 hours? And then also another thing I wanted to briefly explain to the viewers is that in GT racing there are different categories. So you have pro class, you have silver class sometimes, and I know with like Asian Le Mans and with European Le Mans and stuff like that as well, you have a pro am class. So what that typically involves is like let's say a more experienced kind of veteran driver, like a Giancarlo Fisichella, a very, very random example, and
Yeah.
then maybe like a gentleman driver. So somebody that's not necessarily, like a full-time veteran FIA spec driver, but, somebody that's done very well in life and made the right decisions like Davide, and they have lots of money, and they're very enthusiastic and, they've taken the time to get certain badges at a certain level. So, yeah, how do you prepare for like a 24-hour race, and then also how do you cater for kind of a team with a mix of different drivers at different skill sets?
Yeah, I mean, preparation of the 24-hour is not so different from a 4-hour racing, I would say. It's the same procedure, it's just longer and calculation are a bit more complicated, especially for what concerns the 24-hour Le Mans, because as I'm sure you know, there is no full course yellow or safety car is particularly different because you have slow zones and 3 safety cars, so you can't use the same, let's say, peculiarity of the regulation to do the strategy as you do in European Le Mans or shorter races. You need to focus on that. The main difference is you've got 2 weeks when you go Le Mans to prepare the race because you have the test on the Sunday. So the most important stuff you do is using all the data provided by the test, free practices, night practices, and everything to refine your calculation and be ready for the 24-hour. So same procedure of any other endurance racing, just bigger and more complicated, I would say. So nothing crazy. I mean, we didn't do anything crazy. We had issue in the qualifying. We started P19. After a couple of hours, we were in the top 5 and then P1. So really, we didn't do anything crazy. It was just following a strategy that we built with the data for the 2 weeks. Nothing more than that, actually. And for the question on the drivers, for me, from my side, in particular in European Le Mans, I've got an amateur driver that is much slower than my 2 pros, and you do the race on him, basically. All the tests, all the free practices, everything is making him up to speed as fast as you can. Because he's good, he's improving a lot over a race weekend, especially this year. And you want him to be as close as possible to the professional racing driver, because that makes a race. If he can fight, then when the pro get in the car, we are in a much better position to get the top of the class. So it's just about understanding the people. At the end of the story, racing driver are people. So if you work with a professional, you know that lap time is there, the understanding of the car is there. He understands probably also the strategy a bit. So they have the complete package. When you work with an amateur, even if he's an amateur, they're racing for, let's say, 10 years, you need to be more like training with a trainer for your driver. So you do a lot of driver coaching with the other 2 pro drivers. You try to make in the run plan a lot of kilometers for him, long runs, preparing the qualifying. It's a bit more complicated, let's say, but you try to have the most possible confidence in the car for the IM. Because if you make a car and a strategy and everything that makes the IM comfortable and close the gap with the pros, then at a certain point during the race, you will have the pros in the car. And then, let's say, the race is reset and you can actually fight. So it's more psychology sometimes than than engineering.
Yeah, that's so insightful, though, Davide, to learn, and to hear about as well how you kind of strike the balance between the two, but actually a lot of focus and emphasis obviously would go on, I would say not the amateur, but the kind of like the slower driver, or the kind of like rookie driver. And I guess as well, it's interesting as you mentioned as well how you influence the car setup to make it a bit more safe, more comfortable for them. I know with like the Aston Martin, again, being a sim racing nerd myself, it's got two traction control systems as well. So that also must kind of play a factor, I guess, in how the car is set up, and what kind of electronic tools they'll use in terms of the differential, the brake bias, the two traction controls and stuff like that as well. So it's so fascinating and reassuring to kind of hear that from yourself as well. And
Yeah,
linking it into the
it's
next question.
complicated also. I mean, there
Yeah,
is a data
yeah.
engineer for that for a reason. Yeah.
I could imagine. I could imagine. The work probably doesn't ever stop. And it's interesting
No.
to see that too, because if we're talking about like famous Italians as well, obviously you, but also we have like Valentino Rossi, which is making the step in the SRO kind of GT3 racing series as well, and it fascinates me just to see how engineers would probably work with him, because we know that he's an out and out racer, and he's very competitive, whether it's on two wheels or four wheels. But again, for him as well, it must be like having to like learn from scratch how to like make the most of the GT3 car he's driving with the Audi program.
Yeah.
And this since interestingly as well, just to see kind of how the mechanics interact with him and what feedback they look at, and how they will probably compare his data traces and telemetry with the other kind of pro driver in the same kind of team as well, to kind of get him up to speed and stuff. So it's very fascinating. And then we've touched on the real life aspect quite a lot too, but also kind of another thing which is eye opening for a lot of us is that we mentioned that you also conduct sim racing engineering for the Williams team as well, which is phenomenal. So I wanted to firstly find out from you, Davide, like how did that opportunity come about, and what are the key differences you'd say between conducting a race strategy and setup in real life in
Yeah.
comparison to the sim?
With Williams, I work mainly with iRacing only, so I can speak for iRacing more than the other simulator they are fighting with.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, the opportunity came out because they were trying last year to build um, kind of professional sim racing team, and they start to look for engineers. I'm living like 15 minutes from the Williams headquarters because I'm based in Oxford. Um, and just knowing people, I would say, we were speaking with a friend of mine, and he is the one of the responsible of the Williams Esport team as a kind of team manager, let's say, with them. And he was looking for engineers. He knew I was already working with iRacing, and he just said, "Are you interested in it?" I say, "Why not?" So we start from scratch. We didn't have a real engineering department in the sim racing. There was just a guy that has been with them, I think, for 2 years, something like that. So we need to build everything at the beginning of the year. And yeah, main difference is the level of the driver sometimes, because what driver you think you have in a sim racing? A professional racing driver like in the real world, or a very fast guy that is nothing about about driving and everything. It's just fast because it's sim racing. He learn a lot, he's training a lot, and at a certain point in the software he became just fast. So it's the second one. So sometimes they miss an understanding of the strategy. They don't understand maybe why you are doing something in particular. And also when you prepare the car, they work a lot by themselves and then come back to us, and we try to release testing points, let's say, for them to follow. And sometimes it's difficult to make the work complete because maybe they say it's too much, or they don't understand why it's very useful. So we had a couple of problems at the beginning of the year with some drivers in terms of relationship and those kind of stuff. Now it's better because we changed the procedure. We built a better, let's say, portal for them to use. And when they say the results we are getting in the last few months, they start to do stuff you want them to do because it's bringing them to win or making a podium or whatever. So it's good results always that build the trust more than anything else. Yeah, and that's it. The most difference is just how the cars react in the simulator, because it's not real world, and they simulating sometimes very well real world. Other times it's just about understanding what you need to do to make the car faster in the simulator. It is not so different from what you do in the real life, but sometimes it's not physics. Let's say so. The vehicle dynamics of the simulator is not great sometimes, but as soon as you understand, the procedure is the same.
Of course, I think it was very fascinating as well. You touched on earlier in that response, just like how communication plays a key part, and like in the kind of sim racing world, the way that the feedback and like that relationship it grows is slightly different from how, let's say, it will work at a track, with a real life driver. But at the same time, fundamentally, it still comes down to having a good kind of rapport, a good kind of relationship between the drivers and obviously the engineers like yourself as well. And like you mentioned too, with sim racing, it's interesting because I only kind of got involved in it 2 years ago, something like that. And it is so kind of funny because for me, I'm like, wow, this is so cool, And although it's probably not 100% like real life, it's the closest like a normal guy like me could get to it. But then when I, for example, put my dad inside the simulator, it's like he completely forgets how to drive, and it's like he forgets how physics works, So it is very
Yeah,
interesting to see.
I mean, it's also different because when you drive a simulator, I mean, sometimes I drove myself in the past, but I had more time than now. It's difficult because sometimes, if you think about it, when you drive a car, even in the road, it's you moving, and
True.
the environment is fixed around you. In the simulator, is exactly the opposite. So sometimes it's difficult to, let's say, change that bit that make you fast in the simulator because it's not exactly like in the real world. So
Yeah, exactly. And on the kind of topic of that as well, I know that in that answer you kind of said you're more focused on like iRacing, or you do more work in iRacing, but also, for all the gamers and esports guys and sim racers out there too, there are other titles like Assetto Corsa, then you have Assetto Corsa Competizione, then you have R Factor 2. There's so many like products in the market. But to you, Davide, like what makes iRacing like I wouldn't say better, but like more impressive in your opinion or your view.
I mean, in terms of physics, it's not the best. It's the one where you find the most differences with the real world, if I have to be completely honest. I think iRacing is great because of the way the competition, okay?
Mhm.
The competition they built, you can go online, doesn't matter where you are in the world and what time is in the day or in the night, depending. And you always find someone to fight with, to race with, always a server open, always a race ready for you. And that's the only simulator that's doing this properly. So I think is that the reason why is a lot of success in comparison with Assetto Corsa or a Factor, because I worked a bit with some individual with Assetto Corsa and Factor, and I would say the physics is much better, especially with the tires. But it means something because you go in the simulator, you can maybe have an hour to train yourself, but you have no one else in an hosted or in a server to train with, and that makes a difference because it's level of competition and maybe also it's less boring driving with someone else. So I think iRacing made the job in this.
Absolutely, and I kind of support your point as well, Davide, because I know last year, the end of last year, Mercedes also kind of officially announced a partnership with iRacing. That was the
Yeah.
year when they collaboratively worked together, like the guys at Mercedes F1 team and also the iRacing sim racing guys as well. They came together to collaboratively build that year's W12 into the simulator as well, which has become like a stable for a lot of YouTube content out there, should I say? But it was so interesting as well when I think it was James. It's not Allison. It's the other James. Oh my gosh, all the girls that listen to this podcast go crazy as well because there's a huge fascination with him. But anyway, that James, Valtteri is James. James came on as well and said
A
that
James.
exactly actual James. But yeah, just he came out. Oh, James Vowles. There we go. It finally came into
Oh
my
yeah.
head. But yeah, you were saying how impressed he was, by how far it come along, and those points you mentioned as well, Davide, about like how accessible iRacing is. As long as you have a
Yeah.
computer, you pay a membership, and you have like a wheel or something like that. You can download the sim. You have a plethora of different content as well, not just Formula One cars, GT cars, Indy cars, Mazda MX-5, which is quite funny,
Yeah, I mean
NASCARs.
it's the funniest I think. Because no
Exactly.
setup, no nothing. It's just you driving.
Exactly, exactly. And like you mentioned as well, the competitive element of it as well, because there's like special leagues for the esports guys, which they're in a completely different league. And then just for like the normal guys like me as well, there's like a license system. So you race against people of a similar kind of experience and like skill set. And the more races you win, the higher points you earn and the more competitive the splits are. But then also there's an emphasis on clean driving and like driving etiquette too. So for every time you
Yeah.
go off the circuit, you make contact with a car, you lose control of the car, you get X points or instance points, should we say. And that also kind of goes against you. And if you want to race like the very fast cars, you have to kind of like make sure you have a very clean safety rating as well. So like you mentioned, I'm very like excited by iRacing. It's one of my favorite sims to drive at the moment as well. We recently did like the E24 hours of Spa, which I'm not gonna get into. It was very painful for me when I lost it in Blanchimont with a low downforce setup in dirty
Yeah.
air. But
Not
it's
easy.
these very 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 tricky. But again, it's just like it's fun for us, and it's something like the real world as well, which is always fun to know. But to kind of like like add to this question as well, Davide, because you work quite closely with esports drivers as well. Could you give us insight into how much practice an average esport driver will spend preparing for a race? Because one thing I want the listeners to understand, is there's like a very old school, very conventional like mentality that like sim racing is just playing a video game, and it's not as competitive as real life, and people almost look down on it, some people, not all but some. And I'm really glad that through the pandemic a lot of real life drivers were racing
Yeah.
in a lot of simulators, so that broke down the barrier and people started to appreciate like how challenging it can be at the top of epsilon. But of course, just for the work that you do as well, Davide, like how hard is it, would you say, like at the top level, and how many hours would like like a very kind of established esports driver spend preparing for a race?
I would say the fastest is about talent and training, as basically every other sport in the world. Because
Mm.
at the end of the story, now sim racing is a sport at all. Um, I would say an average of 8 hours per day. It's a good
Jeez.
average. It's a lot, I know, but that makes the difference because it's not just about your training at the top level. It's just about making a series of number through the testing points, as I said to you, that makes us able to build a proper strategy and a proper car for them. So it's a lot. Then depends what you want to do. I mean, if you are speaking about top level sim driver that are super competitive in split one iRacing when you have a special event, that's a good average. If you are speaking about a professional racing driver in the world that use the simulator to maybe train an amateur driver or to test a circuit when it's never been, is not something new from the pandemic. I would say it's something that racing driver always did, and there is much less time in the simulator at that point because they prefer to actually have an idea, know the breaking points, because if you crash you just click ask and start again. So it's much more safe to test
Yeah.
something you don't know. And then they prefer, as soon as they have the points and an idea about the track, they prefer to put the car directly into the track and make the real life experience. So it's different. It's depending what's your aim and what's your target, I would say.
Absolutely, and like you mentioned there as well, like even though some people might see it adversely, like it's as competitive as any other sport, and you need the talent. Talent is definitely a thing, but also you don't get to maximize the talent if you don't put the practice in as well. So that's just like good
Yeah.
advice for anything that people want to be successful with. And also, like I thought it'd be an interesting topic to discuss with you as well, Davide, was some of the controversy that came in the last 7 days noise of the sim racing community. Like I'm sure you may be keeping an eye on like the virtual 24 hours of Spa, where unfortunately some people were using an exploit in iRacing when they were driving on the grass, to cool the tires essentially, which is not
Yeah.
what the game was designed to do. And then also like across the pond in F1 22, I know people argue whether that's a sim or a simcade, but with that game as well, there's a recent patch where they were saying esports guys were abusing the tire pressure model in the game and the tire heat or tire temperature model in the game. So all the esports guys were bumping up the tire pressure to like 24 psi, which is really high for a modern
Really
day
high, yeah.
Formula One car. So what Codemasters essentially did was they've made the way the car reacts to setup and more importantly the tire pressure is more volatile, so it stops players being able to exploit certain things within the software to maximize the time and not pay the penalty for it. But kind of the question I wanted to throw to you, Davide, on this was, where do you see the gaps with sim racing at the moment and the experience? And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of developers out there as well listening into this podcast, hopefully. Where do you think that they should like focus on improving, or where would you like to see sim racing in the next 10, 15 years in terms of the software and the way that drivers interact with the actual stuff itself?
Yeah. Tires. I mean,
Mhm.
the tire model in the old simulator is not as in the real life. Some simulators are very similar, but still not there. The tire degradation sometimes is a bit odd, let's say. And as you said, then something happened like using the grass to cool down and make the tire works more better for more time, depending. So I would say the tire model needs absolutely to be proper. It's difficult because building a tire model is one of the most difficult things also in engineering. So I can imagine for a software developer how difficult should be. Uh, but that's definitely the big gap from the real world because setup wise it's similar, a couple of small details it is different, you can use it, but it's not huge. The tire model is making the most of the difference. Even if you're thinking about also in the real world, the tire is the only point of contact between the car and the ground, so you can do a lot with a tire in terms of performance, and this is the same with the tire model in the simulator. And then for the rest, I mean, I don't understand too much the polemic about the using the grass, because at the end of the story is like finding the gray
The
zone in the
limit.
regulation in the real world. I mean,
Yeah,
if you have an opportunity, you are smart enough to think about it and use it without getting a penalty, why not using? I mean, it's racing. It's always working like this. Is I mean,
yeah,
2009
that's true.
Formula One, Brown GP, the double diffuser is exactly the same. So,
Exactly. And even now, it's funny you should mention that because we've
yes,
even got this thing with the flexi floor now as well. And
exactly.
you're absolutely correct. Teams in a very competitive environment like that will use and try and utilize every single thing to their advantage. And also for me, like not being as kind of like, serious as these guys, I almost find it like funny, but also kind of interesting how these esports drivers find these like things in like the software. Because for me, when I was just practicing for it, I was just taking the conventional and normal lines. Whereas for esports driver, they probably have to try different lines, try different temperatures, try different tire pressures, and it's about finding not exploits, but it still is an exploit at the end of the day, to try and get the advantage. And if you don't utilize that advantage, somebody else will, and then you won't be at the front. So it's key, and there's a lot of eyes, there's a lot of money being invested into the whole sim racing and esports like thing as well. So it's not just like like a gentleman sport in that regard. Like people will do what they have to do to win. So I find it fascinating personally myself, and it's interesting as well to kind of get that take from you too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as again training, you discover stuff. The more you train, the more you discover. It's always been like this. Is collecting data at the end. So this is the way. And if you find a hole in the regulation or a hole in a software, a bug or whatever, and you are smart enough to notice and now know how to use it, as I said, why not? I understand that the simulator is not designed to do this kind of stuff, but at the end of the story, people that didn't do it weren't at the top. So at the end, it's
Exactly that.
racing again.
That's true. It's true. Well, it's a dog eat dog world out there, and it is competitive, like you said. Like nobody's gonna feel sympathy or sorry for another competitor if they didn't,
No,
find the
exactly.
same kind of like thing. And it's the same thing in Formula One too. Like you have the teams like Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes. They dominate every single year, and then you have like the teams, towards the middle or the back of the grid, and there's not really much like sympathy or dispensation given to the smaller teams because at the end of the day, when it comes to engineering and it comes to sports, the best wins. So, I see it from both sides, and I think that's a very valid point you made too. And actually, just on this kind of topic as well, Davide, I wanted to get your view on this too. Like recently, we've seen a lot in esports. Just like there's been a lot of programs where we're seeing a transition of normal kind of bedroom noobs like me, like
Yeah.
competing in those competitions, and then actually some of them that are really talented, really good, very consistent, and they're winning all the time. They're getting the opportunity to compete in real life competitions. So, for example, I wanted to use James Baldwin. He won the SRO kind of ACC championship for a couple of years with McLaren. Then he actually earned a seat with Logitech, like it was I think a Logitech program. But he got like opportunity to race with the real life McLaren GT3 team. I think it was a team funded by Jenson Button, which is
Yeah.
crazy as well. I just wanted to get your take on like how often is it that you see that kind of transition from like a esports racer into like a real like racing car driver, and like how common do you think that will become in the future in terms of how teams go about sourcing talent for the future?
I mean, I'd love to see more the transition between the two worlds, because sometimes it's amazing how a professional racing driver in the world is sometimes slower than a very fast sim driver that never drove a racing car in the simulator. So I'd like to see this more. It was one of the starting ideas for a cup of racing too, to make a point of contact between the two worlds in order to have like in the future something more merged between sim racing and real life, because I think both environment, both industry can have reciprocal benefit from this, because having the simulator and the sim driver testing a car, for example, makes them the perfect driver to understand the model, because they are not racing drivers, so they don't expect the car behaving like in the real world, because they never or often they have very poor experience with a real car, so they understand the model in the simulator sometime, and that's very useful for engineers to build a model that works for the professional racing driver, because you will have the feedback from the real racing driver, so they know how a car reacts, the feedback from a sim driver, they know how a simulator works and the model should behave. If you mix that and you are good in doing modeling, you will get a very good model for testing in the real world too. So I'd like to see this transition a lot more than what we see now in the future. I think there are the base, because SRO through the GT World Challenge is sponsor of Fanatec. So I think in Assetto Corsa Competizione they have the official license for the all GT cars. So if you want to drive a Bentley, Assetto Corsa is the only one that got the Bentley model, for example. So I think in the future will be more common to see the transition. I hope for.
Yeah, I remain hopeful as well, Davide, on that one too, because it's amazing. We always ask for more diversity, more opportunities for people, and this is a very kind of organic and, like you mentioned, it's like a grassroots way for somebody that's got the enthusiasm, they have the talent, they've got the dedication, to spend that amount of time to learn and to compete, at the top level within the sim racing and esports world, and then to take all those skills, all that data, all that knowledge and experience in a transferable skill set into the real life as well. And it's very exciting, and it's nice as well when you see somebody come from like that stage and then you see them grow and they're with works factory team or part of like a huge program, and you see this transition. So I definitely agree with you on that. And moving on to something different here, Davide. I don't want to get you killed by the tifosi, but as as an Italian, I have to ask you this question and kind of like throw in some Formula One stuff in this podcast too. critics have been very outspoken about Ferrari this season so far. We're coming up to, well, we've gone past the halfway stage and we're coming up to the summer break soon. There's been a lot of criticism, sometimes with their inability to maximize the result. And, it's been a thing we've seen in seasons gone by, and pretty much sometimes this year too, whether it's through reliability, driver error caused by, an issue with the strategy, maybe. There's been loads of like various examples. But the question really is, Davide, is why do you think this happens like with Ferrari? Because all teams make mistakes, but I know that the Tifosi hold Ferrari to a very high standard in Italy. And
Yeah.
what's your take on this season so far? Do you think that they still realistically have a prospect of winning the championship this year?
I mean, it's always difficult to make decisions. So when you see a very bad decision on strategy, I mean, it's easy from the TV to see, oh, it's wrong. And after that, it's always easy to see you should have done like this and not like that. In the moment, you have half a second, a tenth of second to make a decision is very, very difficult sometimes to make the right one. Now, Ferrari is being consistent in doing mistakes for the last few years. It's not just this year, because if you remember 2017, 2018, they destroyed their own championship just with driver mistake and strategy mistake, if you remember.
Mhm.
So I think is something within the team they should change a bit the position inside the team, especially when it's about the key positions. Because the thing also that surprised me if is, I mean, you are fighting for the championship with one driver. You have a huge advantage in the championship after 3 races, and you were able to prefer the other driver to win a race. That's just doesn't make any sense. Because I understand you want to win the constructor, you want to have the second driver perfectly able to win races. But what happened if at the end of the year you lost that, let's say, 10 points and you lost the championship for 10 points? I mean, a professional racing team at that level with that history shouldn't have this situation happening. Never.
Mhm.
But at the same time, as I said, I understand the stress and the difficult to make decision, and sometimes we just don't know what's going on inside a team because they are very private stuff. So my idea is they don't have the right people in the right places. That's why it's consistently wrong what they do. But again, it's easy from the outside to say this kind of stuff. Then in the inside, you may know more.
Yeah, and I think Davide, you were really fair. I think that's a fair response, in the way that we kind of look at that situation. And when you look at them and then you compare like how, Red Bull, they seem to be very kind of sharp with the strategy. And then if you even look at Mercedes this year, they haven't got the car quite correct. It's taken them some time to find the right direction. But then if you try to remember the immediate future for the last 8 years, they've either had a car or had the driver or had a combination of this the team, to pull through even in like any challenge, any rule
Yeah,
regulation changes, any kind of races where they didn't qualify on pole, but yet still they maximized the results or they pulled off something brilliant with the strategy and they made it work. And even for me, like I grew up, my dad is a huge Michael Schumacher fan, so growing up in the house, it was red car and it was Ferrari and like you think my dad would be a Tifosi for a Caribbean guy, but yeah, it's sad to me because you always want the red car to do better, you always want the red team to do better, and you see the passion, you see the culture when you go to places at Monza, Imola, Mugello. You see this how much it means to the fans. And yeah, like the team should be able to deliver much better and to compete to that level because they have the legacy, they have the experience. But like you mentioned there too as well, it's sometimes the personnel, sometimes it's the personnel in the positions. Because I remember under the Luca de Montezemolo period of Ferrari, it was a very ruthless period, and people were
yeah,
like getting sacked left, right, and center, and it didn't instill much confidence probably in the staff, in the mechanics, and the engineers because they knew that their positions were very very at risk. Whereas I think now what they've tried to do at the culture at Ferrari is bring Bonotto in, try to kind of keep a steady and stable ship, which I think has gotten them so far, definitely in terms of car development performance. But then, like you mentioned as well, when it comes to executing it all. You've got all the ingredients, but now you need to make an excellent, pasta. You need to deliver excellent
Yeah.
kind of like, food. Then it doesn't quite come together, and it can just be something so minor, or it could be, Charles has led pretty much every single race or every single lap of the race, and then a component fails, and then you think that they would understand it, and then next week a similar thing happens. So we had like a throttle pedal and all these situations. So I think you really encapsulated it quite well, without throwing them too much shade. I know earlier on in the week we were cooking them a bit more, but I think that was fair, and I think I really, I like your kind of take, and I respect your view on that too, because I think it's one many of us share. And then the next question I wanted to bring you, Davide. This is one from the fans. It's like a fantasy question. They've said, if you had to enter a team into the virtual Spa 24 hours, so actually that was last week, but then we actually have the real 24 hours of Spa this week, but we're going to stick with the virtual one. They've asked, which real life driver would you like to have, and which esports driver would you like to have to represent a cup of tea or a cup of racing?
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's not objective my answer, but I mean, I would like to have if you were speaking about GT, I'd like to have Johnny Adam. That's actually one of my driver from TF as a real racing driver, and I don't know if you know him. It's Italian.
Mhm.
He's in Williams since like, I think 6 months or something like that. It's Dino Lombardi
Oh, of course,
as an
man.
esport.
I
Yeah,
see his name in the time trial all the time. He
yeah,
always says the
yeah.
fastest times.
Because I mean, he's naturally faster in the sim racing, but in the last 6 months, when he got a proper support from the team, he improved crazy, really a lot. So I think the combination will be ideal and funny because you got the experience of a very, very experienced racing driver like Johnny, and at the same time a very fast and quick learner as Adino. So it should be a good couple, I think.
Absolutely, I agree with you on that as well, and I definitely agree with the logic in that approach too, because like you've got like almost the best of both worlds in that situation, and Johnny Adams as well is a phenomenal driver. I mean,
Yeah.
watching the GT racing as well, he's always up there and always quite competitive with the machinery you give him. So yeah, that's really good. Another kind of question, one of the final ones before we conclude this episode. Davide, what would you say has been your most memorable race weekend experience from like the engineering point of view? Like, could you give us like an example of like a race where it didn't seem like you like maybe have the outright pace, or like maybe the other teams with the BOP they had an advantage, or maybe something with the weather changing, so something like this where like you weren't expecting to kind of like get a result, but actually through strategy, like you've managed to turn the fortunes of the team completely, in a different direction, and got the success.
I have two very different races in mind with two different roles from my side. So I would start with the race engineering one. So this year, Imola European Le Mans Series, because we never been there with the Aston Martin GTE. So we have no data, no nothing apart from a GT3 GT World Challenge data from another Aston. But for the rest, that was everything. Just about you brake differently because one car is with the ABS, the other one no. So it wasn't exactly the proper one. So we put together a star setup that was decent, and we actually went there without knowing the track for the drivers and how the car will behave there. We didn't expect to have a car that was fast in Imola, and we discovered after the first 10 laps in the first test to actually were very fast. So we did P1 and P2 in that race with the two cars, and it was amazing actually because I never expect to have a P1 and P2 with this team this year, and we did it. So we finished that race leading the championship with both cars. Was amazing. Everybody did his job perfectly. We minimized the mistakes because at the end of the story, motorsport is not about winning when you do everything perfect is you win when you do less mistake than the others, you know.
Mhm.
So it was great. It was in May this year. It was very great race, and all the weekend we changed, I think, very little in the car. Was not really fast. Driver just find confidence with them. Um, they learned the track very quickly. The car was responsive and very good all the time. Also, John, the amateur driver, was faster than ever. The mindset was completely changed after Imola, and we had a much better amateur driver in the car now after that. So that was one of the best memories in racing I have so far, I would say. Maybe the best weekend of my life also at the moment. And the other one, but it was in performance engineering role, so the car wasn't mine, is 24-hour Le Mans, because we had a BOP that wasn't perfect for us, was perfect for Porsche. In fact, at the beginning of the race, there were 6 Porsche in 6th position, I think, in top 6. It was
Wow.
crazy the gap they have from everybody else. They have like 2-3 seconds faster than everybody else at the beginning of the race. We had issues in the qualifying, so we didn't qualify very well with both cars. We started at the back, the BOP wasn't perfect. We didn't expect to win at all. And then it's 24-hour Le Mans. Even if I wasn't a race engineer, it's always good to go there with all the atmosphere. Finishing the 24-hour race is always a victory already, because it's not easy with reliability and all the stuff that can happen. And then if you win also as a team, I mean, what do you want more? I would say. I mean, I want a car in a 24-hour Le Mans, but that's another story.
Oh well, Davide, I hope we can get you that car one day, man. Because you're so enthusiastic, you're so passionate. We can just kind of sense that, from the stories, the experiences you've shared with us as well. And honestly, it's amazing to get this level of insight because you tune in as like a viewer or a fan like me into the TV. It's Max Verstappen did this, Leclerc did this, Lewis did this, and I feel you guys, the engineers, the mechanics, even just like the people that do the catering and stuff like that, it's you guys that pull the team together and actually give the drivers the opportunity to maximize the results. Without you guys, the drivers would be lost. They'd be trying to find a sat nav on their steering wheels. So it's impeccable. It's absolutely impeccable and so admiring and like inspiring for people like me and all of our listeners to listen to the experiences you've had, the hardships and challenges you've gone through as well. You come across as a person that you don't let like negative things try and define you. You always look for solutions to the problem rather than dwelling on the problem, which is a positive mentality I love. And we're so excited for the journey that you're on at the moment, Davide. And we want to have you again on the podcast again, hopefully this year, soon, because this episode will go out. We'll hopefully be able to reach out to a lot more different people, that will be discovering us for the first time as well. I know that they're gonna have, bucket loads of questions for you next time. So, we're so proud of you, Davide, and we really respect and we're so honored to have your time as well. But before you go as well, Davide, before you tell us as well just what you're working on, after the break and where they can find you. Georgina, I'm just gonna throw Georgina underneath the bus directly for this too. I always say to her, one of these days she's gonna make an Italian punch me in the throat. But I have to ask you this as well. Like pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
That's very difficult question because you shouldn't.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you shouldn't. I mean, I know a lot of people likes in the world, but it's like illegal in Italy. Okay? You can get arrested for this. So, no, I'm joking. I mean, you're not really get arrested, but you should, because I mean, it doesn't make any sense having a pineapple on the pizza. So it's
Yeah,
it's just
I agree.
natural.
It's true. It's true, Davide. Like it shouldn't be a thing, man. It's like the two opposites combining. Like I couldn't think of like like a
Yeah.
weirder pairing of two things. So I'm glad you said that too. And yeah, at least the listeners know if there's any
Yeah,
secret
exactly, exactly.
pineapple on pizza listeners out there that they definitely can't go to Italy on that kind of wave at all. But no, Davide, honestly, it's been so phenomenal. I'm so thankful to have you. It's amazing when we have special guests like you. You really make our show. And just for the listeners at home as well, what can they look forward to you doing? Any projects, any racing series as well once you return back from your break that they can look forward to?
Yeah, the rest of the year is just about ending the championships. So basically, we are midway from the ELMS, so we have 3 races to go, and will be Barcelona at the end of August, then will be Spa and Portimao September and October. Hopefully, we can still fighting for the championship because we are not leading anymore after a very bad Monza BOP we've got a couple of weeks ago. But the leadership is not far away, so we will try to fight back for that. And then for what concerns the rest, it's been WEC, so the World Endurance Championship, flying to Japan at the beginning of September for the 6 hour of Fuji, and then we have the last of the year in November, 8 hour of Bahrain. So that's the main commitments for this year. No further project is just focusing on the rest of the year, trying to win something because it's been a good year so far. It would be great to win a championship or do other podiums for us always. And then we'll see for 2023 if we continue with this or do something different.
Oh, that's phenomenal, Davide. Honestly, like it's really cool just to see, that there's so many programs going on, and like there's a lot of racing there too. So listeners at home as well, make sure that you go and follow the TF racing team as well. Make sure you go to Davide's company as well, a cup of racing. Make sure you check out their Instagram and you follow and you show support because that's what it's all about. And Davide as well, where can they find you? And are there anything else you'd like to plug or you'd like to mention as well? I'd love to let you to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, main social media, you already spoke about it. So a Cup of Racing is on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. You just write a Cup of Racing and you find it. And then I've got a website, it's www.acupofracing.com. It's not completely updated, working on it because been busy, but it's these are the main network, the main places where find information and follow us. Um, that's it. I mean, thank you very much for this because I'm enjoying the podcast so far. So thanks for having me.
Ah, Davide, you are a star. Davide de Russis, you are a legend. We really appreciate you. We definitely have to, that's the next question I need to ask you. When we invite you later on in the year, would you be happy to come back again?
After the end of the championship, why not? We may have a
Ah,
catch up about everything. So let's see if we
excellent.
can win something.
Oh, no, there's no pressure now. There's no pressure now.
No pressure. As always, no pressure.
No pressure. Honestly, Davide, you're a star, man, and your knowledge is just amazing as well. I know there's gonna be a lot of positive feedback, a lot of people telling me and Georgina and everybody in our community as well that have learned so much from this, this session as well. So we definitely need you back on at the end of the season, so we can have a wrap up and talk about maybe other developments in the sim racing community as well. But yeah, we're super proud of you. We really admire the work that you're doing, and you're inspiring so many young people as well, Davide. I want you to know that too, because in school, at least when I was going to school, it was like just being a race engineer just wasn't talked about enough. So now that I find
Yeah.
myself in this kind of position doing this podcast and we speak to different people from different backgrounds, it's really amazing to listen to the stories, to understand, what people have been through to get where they need to be, and like you mentioned, not just like in terms of qualifications, but the practical experience, the hours, the countless hours of free volunteering as well.
Yeah.
It's not to be dismissed. So we're
Yeah,
super
it's
proud of
it's
you.
also the attitude. I mean, it's not just about the experience you've got. It's everything. It's the complete package. It's difficult. Sometimes you just ask why I'm doing this. I should have done like every other job will be much easier. But at the end of the story, it's something I wanted to do since forever. So can't stop now. Can't quit now.
Oh, exactly, and that's the thing. You're creating like I see you, Davide, as like a trendsetter because the work that you're doing and the bridge or the gap that you're bridging, between real life racing and sim racing as well, it's gonna open the door, for the next, big superstar racing driver. It's gonna open up the next evolution, for the racing team that needs to get more data. There's not as much track time for them, so they have to do everything in the simulator. Like the work that you do is phenomenal. That's coming from me. So I'm super proud of you. But yeah, we'll wrap the episode up there. So guys, make sure you obviously go and follow Davide on all the social media platforms. Davide de Russis, he's amazing. He's the legend. He's the one and only. So you have to make sure you go and show him some love from us. And yeah, it's been your boy AMG Den, your usual co-host from Stripping the Dip In. Make sure you like this video. Make sure that you retweet, you share with a friend of a friend. Show your grandma. Your grandma should be sim racing as well. See if we can get her to be the next Yano up there in the esports competitions as well. But jokes aside, it's been an absolute pleasure and a really great episode for me. And until next time, guys, it's been AMG Dens on this episode of Stripping the Dipping, and I'm out. Peace.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. It was very good.
Aw, thank you, Davide.